Chilling tales for dark nights.
Hi, my name is William Dalphin, author of A Game of Flashlight Tag and Hunger, which have been featured on Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I've also written a number of other stories you may have heard narrated on the No Sleep podcast or YouTube. I have spent the past 5 years sharing my love of horror with the internet. I'm speaking to you today to ask for your support. A book is in the works, a compilation of those 5 years I've dedicated to instilling fear and dread in others. And in the tradition of some of the finest collections of short horror out there, it'll be fully illustrated with an audiobook edition available as well. But this effort needs the help of people like you to bring the book to life. I and the other people behind the scenes are just like you, regular folk with working class jobs, trying to get this off the ground. To help ease some of the costs, we've set up a GoFundMe fundraising page. Whether you can contribute monetarily, or by the simple act of spreading the word about this project by liking and sharing it on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and other social media sites, no amount of help is too small. If you've enjoyed my work on Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, the No Sleep podcast, or from any of the other places it's been featured, please consider donating and spreading the word. Even $1 can help. You'll find links in the on-screen annotations and in the video description below. Thank you for your help and for the years of reading and listening.
A Game of Flashlight Tag. Written by William Dalphin. Performed by Jeff Clement. Featuring Luke Fisher and Steve Taylor. Audio production and music by Jeff Clement. When I was 10 years old, I played a late-night game of flashlight tag with a bunch of neighborhood kids. If you don't know what flashlight tag is, it's the same as tag, but you play it in the dark. The person who is it gets a flashlight, and rather than tag you physically, they shine the beam on you, and then they have to yell the name of the person they see with it in order to tag them. It was really cloudy that night, and most people had their curtains drawn, so it was the perfect level of darkness for hiding in. The side of the street my house was on was skirted by a broad length of woods. That was basically the boundary for our side of the game. You could run through any yard, even go across the street and run through their yards, but you weren't allowed to hide in the woods because it was too difficult to find anyone in there, and it was very easy to trip over tree limbs or end up with poison oak. Of course, this rule was frequently and flagrantly ignored when people got too close to being caught. They'd duck off into the bushes for a few seconds or run behind a group of trees to evade capture. I don't remember who was it at the time, but I was hiding in a backyard 2 houses down from my house. The family that lived there had a little playhouse for their daughter, a swing set, and a doghouse, but no dog. I would periodically duck into the doghouse whenever I saw the flashlight's searching beam approaching. Those of us trying to hide from the it person liked to spook each other in the dark by jumping out of nowhere and making each other scream, giving away our positions. I thought I knew where the it guy was, but I got comfortable hanging out on the swing set. Suddenly, a person with a flashlight came around the corner of the house and angled their beam almost directly at me. I leapt from my seat and ran for the edge of the woods. When I got there, I hovered in case they saw me and planned to yell at me for cheating. The beam of light seemed to explore the swing set where I had been, then came in my direction, but there was no sense of hurry at all to it, and I wondered for a second if maybe I'd attracted the attention of the homeowner. Most people on the block knew we were out playing flashlight tag, but you never could be sure that someone wouldn't get nervous if you stayed in their yard too long. So I crouched down in the grass and waited to see who it was. They shined the light right in my face, and I tried to cover it with my hand to avoid identification. The creepy thing was, they never said anything. They just shined that light on me.
"You got me,"
I exclaimed, hoping that if it was a homeowner, they'd realize I thought they were the flashlight tagger. Then I realized that 2 houses down, people were yelling, and there was the It Guy's flashlight chasing them around. I stood up and tried to see who was shining the light on me. They just stood there, not moving, not saying anything. I felt a little freaked out.
If you don't want us playing in your yard, I'll go tell them it's off limits, okay?
The person started walking toward me. Something didn't feel right, so I started walking toward the edge of the yard. The person just kept shining the light on me and coming toward me. So I ran. When I looked back, the person with the flashlight was running too, and they were an adult, much bigger and much faster than I was. I felt scared, not sure why this person was chasing me. I ran toward where the other kids had been, but they were gone now. It just seemed to be me and the person with the flashlight. So I turned right and ducked into the woods. I dropped to the ground and shook some nearby bushes in an effort to confuse the person, then shimmied under a ring of thick bushes and curled up. I saw the flashlight in the woods nearby, looking around. I heard the person's footsteps breaking sticks and crunching on pine needles. I didn't know what was going on, and I just wanted to get back to all the other kids. Eventually, the flashlight wandered deeper into the woods, and I crawled, quiet as a mouse, back to the edge of the trees, and then got up and ran toward the street. I was immediately caught by the person who was it, but I didn't care. He yelled loudly that I was now it, and I tried desperately to tell him that there was someone else with a flashlight wandering around in the woods, but he took off in the dark yelling,
"No tagbacks!"
Don't go in the woods!
I yelled, but no one responded. Of course, anyone who heard me had probably just assumed I was talking about not cheating at the game, but I was sincerely worried about the adult stranger wandering around in them. Of course, now I had a flashlight of my own, so I thought I should go and see if I could find out who that was, just to make myself feel better. I went back behind the house I'd come from, and a bunch of laughing shadows scampered out of sight into neighboring yards. I ignored them and headed straight for the trees. I couldn't see any other light in there, so I thought, maybe he went home. I didn't know if it was a man or a woman, but I couldn't imagine any women trudging through the woods at night. So I went about playing the game again, albeit anxious because of the lingering thought that there was someone wandering in the woods who didn't seem to be playing the game with us. I ran across the street and chased people through the backyards there, but after a while I found the lots empty and realized that they must have gone back across the street. I ran back over and was exploring the Beach's backyard. Mrs. Beach had a clothesline with a bunch of drying sheets on it, and her daughter Charlotte liked to hide among the linens and stay close to home in case she got too scared of the dark. She was only a year younger than me. I thought I heard something at the tree line, so I went over and was waving the flashlight around into the woods.
Stay out of the woods!
I remember yelling. I waved the flashlight back and forth a couple more times, then saw someone off in the distance. I held the light on whoever it was. They were about 20 yards into the woods and hard to make out, but it looked to me like Charlotte. Charlotte had brown hair that her mother insisted on keeping shoulder length. We always dressed dark for flashlight tag, and Charlotte liked to wear a deep purple sweatshirt, so it was usually easy to tell when you'd found her.
Charlotte, I see you!
I yelled. She just stood there. I continued to hold the light on her and call her name, but she didn't seem to move. She stood there, partially obscured by a tree, and looked at me. The distance between us was enough that I couldn't see if she was blinking or not, but she had her head propped at an angle like she was looking around the trunk at me with her mouth hanging slightly open. Every now and then she sort of twitched or squirmed. It was a real freaky kind of movement.
Charlotte, come out of there!
I yelled.
Everybody! Charlotte's it, but she won't come out of the woods.
Some kids, including my friend Dustin, appeared behind me and formed a chorus, yelling at Charlotte to come out.
Do you see her?
I asked.
Yeah, she's over behind that tree. Charlotte, get over here.
Dustin shouted. But she wouldn't come.
Charlotte, are you okay? Get over here, dummy.
Charlotte seemed to stand up straighter than before, and then disappeared suddenly behind the tree. We could hear movement, but it seemed to be going away rather than toward us. Dustin started shouting Charlotte's name again and trudged into the woods after her. Before he got too far, I grabbed him and gave him my flashlight to take with him. I was scared again, because this all seemed surreal. While Dustin searched the woods, I went to Charlotte's house and knocked until her father answered.
Mr. Beach, Charlotte won't come out of the woods, and I'm worried about her.
I told him. I wasn't sure if he'd take me seriously, but he rolled up his newspaper and disappeared into the closet behind the door for a moment before returning with a huge flashlight strapped to a car battery.
Show me where she is,
he told me, so I led him to the woods and pointed to where I'd seen her.
She was right there,
I said.
by a tree, but she wouldn't come out, and she was acting like she was sick or something.
A bunch of the other kids kept calling Charlotte, and I could see Dustin's flashlight beam moving around through the trees. Mr. Beach went in after him. They explored the woods for a good 15 to 20 minutes, and Mr. Beach started to get real angry. We heard him yelling very loudly for Charlotte, threatening her with all sorts of punishments if she didn't get back in the backyard that instant. The game was over by then, and we kids just stood there in the Beach's backyard, among the linens, and watched. Dustin came running back out of the bushes with a dead flashlight. Eventually, Mr. Beach came back out of the woods.
Game over, kids.
He said.
Get inside. Ask your folks if they can help me and bring flashlights.
We all ran back home. My dad went out with 3 different flashlights. My mother went and turned on all the lights in the back rooms and opened the curtains and shades to help illuminate the backyard. I sat on the couch, all upset, and she eventually came back and hugged me. And she sat with me while I told her about the person with the flashlight chasing me, and how I thought maybe Charlotte had run into him. Mr. Beach had gone inside and called the authorities to report a missing child. The police brought huge lights and did a march through the woods, checking very thoroughly. But they didn't find her. My mother told my dad what I'd told her. He told an officer, and I ended up giving a statement. They went to the house 3 doors down and knocked, but the folks that lived there had been asleep and didn't know who would have been in their backyard. The police asked all up and down the neighborhood, but nobody claimed to know anything. The other end of the woods came to a back road mainly used by logging trucks. They found Charlotte 2 days later, on the other side of that logging road, at the bottom of an embankment that ended at a stream. She'd been stuffed into a drain pipe. Her neck had been broken, and she'd been stabbed multiple times afterward. My parents weren't the ones to tell me about it. They thought it would upset me. I heard all the details from Dustin at school the next day. That night was the most awful thing our town had ever experienced. On account of what happened to Charlotte, The police blocked off the logging road and spent months tracking down loggers and truckers who frequently used it. There was a curfew for months, and we were told not to play flashlight tag anymore. We didn't argue. What leaves me shaking to this day is the memory of Charlotte's face hanging out from behind the tree, looking at me. Sometimes I wonder if at that moment I had witnessed her death. And I wonder if it had almost been me. Hunger by William Dalphin. Narrated by Jeff Clement. As a doctor, I'm bound by doctor-patient privilege to not disclose the specifics of what I'm about to tell you. But as a human being, I feel compelled to share. This is, without a doubt, the most horrific story I've ever had the displeasure of being a part of. It was 2009, and my schedule for that day was light. I was just finishing up my lunch when I got a call from a friend and colleague who had his own practice in the same building as me. Sometimes we would send work each other's way when we knew the other could use it. I was a bit elated at the prospect of him calling me because I'd just begun going over my books and stressing a bit.
Are you busy right now? I'd like to send someone up to you,
he said. No, my afternoon is barren. What are the details?
It's a walk-in. From the look of it, an eating disorder. Her mother is concerned.
Eating disorder. Those can be unpleasant. I'd actually had a bulimic throw up in my office once when I stepped out momentarily to check my calendar. Still, I needed the work. All right, send her up. I tried to tidy up my desk to make my office look more presentable and professional while I waited. 10 minutes ticked by and no patient showed up, so I stepped out to go looking for her. When I got to the hall, there was a small contingent of people standing around the elevator. They were talking amongst themselves. What's going on? I asked.
The elevator's broke,
someone said. Shit. I bet she's on there, I thought. What floor is it stuck on?
10th and 11th?
Yeah, that would be about right. My colleague's office was on the 10th, 3 floors down. I knew from experience that it could be anywhere up to an hour before they got the elevator working again. I hoped she wasn't claustrophobic. Returning to my office, I called downstairs.
What's up?
My colleague asked after picking up. She's stuck in the elevator. He laughed.
Really? Poor thing.
What's her name?
Amelia.
He paused.
Amelia D. something.
All right, thanks. If you got any impressions on her from your brief visit, maybe you can share them later. Over drinks?
Sure,
Don't tell me. I want to form my own opinion first.
Okay.
True to form, an hour and 10 minutes later, I heard a loud cheer from the hallway, indicating the elevator had started working again. I should go make sure she's all right, I thought to myself, and went out to join the throng of people standing around in the hallway. There were a lot more people by then, and I couldn't make my way to the elevator doors or even see them from where I was, but I could hear it when the elevator dinged, indicating it was stopping on our floor, and the rolling mechanical sound of the doors opening. There was a loud gasp from the crowd of people, followed by a lot of jabbering.
Holy shit!
Someone said quite loudly. People started hustling away from the elevator, shoving past me. I struggled against the tide and made my way to where a number of people were standing around, staring into the elevator cab. As I approached, I could smell this stench. It was like stumbling into the apartment of a recluse who hadn't come out or bathed for years. It rolled like a wave out of the elevator and cascaded over everyone in the hallway. A young man in a business suit who looked dressed for an interview was covering his mouth and nose with a handkerchief. I skirted around him to see into the elevator. The woman in the elevator was not at all what I was expecting. Massively obese, she looked like she weighed somewhere around 500-600 pounds. Her face was so puffed up, her eyes were barely visible, just 2 dark dots above her cheeks. She had frizzed out brown hair that still had curlers in it. The notion that I was smelling a recluse seemed all the more plausible at the sight of her. Her mouth was covered with what looked like greasy barbecue sauce. There was even some sort of gristle at the corners of her lips. There was more of it all over her hands and wiped down the front of her shirt. It looked like she had come straight from an all-you-can-eat rib buffet. Clenched tightly in one of her hands was a big black trash bag that sagged full of something that seemed to slosh around inside it. The smell coming out of it was nauseating. The woman stepped out of the elevator, her eyes and nose running with tears and mucus. I stepped forward while everyone else backed away, horrified. "Amelia?" I asked her. She looked at me through her beady little piggy eyes, her cheeks covered with that vile red gunk and streaking with tears, and opened her mouth. For about 3 seconds, I had the horrible notion that she was going to vomit an entire barbecue on me.
I was hungry,"
she stuttered with a thick southern accent. The young man in the suit heaved involuntarily at the smell of her breath, and then strode away, trying to maintain his demeanor. "That's okay. Do you want to talk about it in my office?" I said, reaching out to help her. Seeing me reach out to her, she clenched her black trash bag tightly and hugged it to her chest. The contents of it made a sickening squish sound. I could taste my own lunch in the back of my throat. "Is that yours?" I asked. "I'm not going to take it." She started sobbing, this horrible, almost hob-like squeal of a sob. Honestly, I didn't want to touch her. I wanted to go back into my office, lock the door, and pretend I was glad my afternoon was completely empty. The smell wafting off her and off that bag of spoils was going to be permeating every crevice of my office for days. I just knew it. Still, this was a human being that had come seeking my help, and I was not about to turn her away. "My office is right down the hall," Why don't you come with me? I started walking. In my head, I said, if she doesn't come with me, fuck it. She can go back to her apartment that's probably filled with roaches and feces and who knows what other ungodly things, and I'll find someone else to help. But she followed me, lumbering on legs that stretched the limits of the sweatpants she had on. I held the door open for her and she waddled in, kneading the contents of that trash bag in her thick sausage fingers, making it belch and splurch. She stopped and just stood there in the middle of my office.
The elevator got stuck,
she mumbled. Yes, I'm sorry about that. I hope you were all right. Thank goodness you brought something to eat, yes? She started crying again, squeezing her trash bag, and I was afraid it was going to explode and leave God knows what all over my office floor. She nodded as her face turned red and tears poured out of seemingly every pore of her head. I went and got her a box of tissues and handed her a couple. She tried to take them while still holding onto the bag with both hands. Would you like me to hold that? I offered, praying she'd say no. She shook her head. What do you have in there? I finally decided to ask. She huffed and snorted, trying to inhale all the fluid back into her face. Using one of the tissues, she mopped her eyes and mouth, getting blotchy red smears all over the place.
Leftovers?
She stuttered. Then her chest started heaving, and she threw her head back and started bawling again. Her face was like a fountain. She was so utterly miserable, and I really started to feel bad for her. Look, I said, getting stuck in that elevator was obviously pretty traumatic. Her wailing hit a crescendo. So why don't we postpone things until you've calmed down a bit? She struggled through her sobbing.
You want to meet with me?
Well, yes, but not today. Why don't you go home and try to relax? I don't think you're in the right frame of mind right now to talk. So let's schedule an appointment for later this week. How does that sound? I walked back to my desk and got out one of my cards. Her mouth was quivering and she looked ready to collapse into a pile of screaming phlegm, but she was calming down a bit, just nodding more than anything. And she took my card with the same sticky fingers, holding several drippy tissues.
Thank you,
she said quietly. I couldn't read her face at all. Her features were so red and swollen and wet that she seemed almost blank and expressionless. Do you want me to escort you down to the lobby? I asked, in case something happens with the elevator again. It should be all right, but I don't want you to be nervous. She shook her head.
That doesn't seem like a good idea.
Okay. And with that, she turned around and waddled out of my office, slowly, sobbing slightly every now and then. With her went that sloshy black trash bag, and with them both went that putrid aroma of filth and squalor. I literally breathed a sigh of relief as I heard the door click shut. She never called me back. It was a week later that I finally got around to having drinks with my colleague from downstairs. We were relaxing, having a couple beers, and I suddenly remembered her. Oh, thanks, by the way, I said.
For what?
For Amelia.
Who?
Amelia. Eating disorder. Last week you sent her up to me, remember?
Oh, right.
He sipped his beer.
The one who got stuck in the elevator. How did that go?
She was a wreck, I said, sobbing and practically hysterical. I talked her into rescheduling, but she hasn't called me to make an appointment.
Did you talk to her mother?
No, I didn't get any information from her. I gave her my card.
What did you think?
He asked. Classic food dependency, I said. Definitely a binge eater. Her face was just all...
No, not the mother, I mean Amelia.
What?
What did you think of Amelia?
He said again. I'm telling you what I thought.
Amelia, the scrawny 12-year-old girl, you think is a binge eater?
What? No, that's not... And then it hit me. Was her mother with her?
Yeah, I sent them both up to you.
They were in the elevator together? He looked at me, and the same dawning realization came over his face. Needless to say, she never rescheduled. Amelia D. something. Nor did her mother, the nameless, obese woman I met that day at the elevator, smelling like death, covered in gore, and carrying her trash bag of sloshing leftovers.